Our tool for Szabonian deconstruction of highly evolved religions, which is the 11th essay in my enumerated series. In Objective versus Intersubjective Truth, Nick Szabo gives us some ideas for sorting through types of complex information that might reflexively involve our subjective beliefs, i.e., we want to observe a complex phenomenon, but through complexity distance. He asks, which methods should we use to traverse the complexity of culture, and suggests there is usefulness in the metaphor of God and the use of games. Quote, what are the proper methods for critiquing traditions related to interpersonal behavior? The methods of the humanities include, at their core, for examining the subjective sources and interpreters of a tradition. Here, most arguments center around subjects, the authorities who are sources, transmitters, and/or interpreters of a tradition. Arguments may also resolve around the subjects referenced in traditional texts, as heroic figures, strategic players, and so on. An interesting book on game theory, Negotiation Games by Stephen Brams, reinterprets several Torah Old Testament stories as games between the characters in the stories. God becomes just one of several strategic players, albeit often with some tricks up his sleeve. Somehow, I think my old Sunday school teacher would not have approved, but these are fascinating and potentially valuable interpretations. He also warns against the social sciences as having shallow complexity and thus not being suitable for understanding and applying to higher evolved culture and institutions, etc. Quote, we must conclude that social sciences, rational ethics, legal realism, law and economics, and other such shallowly rational approaches to interpersonal problems can sometimes provide justifications in the sense of C, but it is a severe misapplication to use them to refute highly evolved traditions. End quote. The superficial cultures that arise are easily understood to be shallow and not valuable, not derived from the history and knowledge of man. Quote, thus, a discovery in social science which contradicts a highly evolved belief is most likely hermeneutically false, ultimately destructive to the individuals or groups who believe it in preference to the highly evolved beliefs. We can have horizontal, transient, or vertical, traditional, intersubjective truths. Prices imply intersubjective connectivity. Quote, intersubjective truths can be classified into at least two major groups, transient, proximate between contemporaries, and traditional, ultimate or multi-generational. Hayek's canonical example of a transient intersubjective truth is a market price. Most economists think of price in terms of value rather than truth, but prices incorporate both objective information unknown to other subjects and the value of those subjects. In intersubjective communications, value and truth are inseparably intertwined. End quote. We could consider the highly evolved tradition of prices. Perhaps we should think of prices as traditional and transient in this sense. Szabo suggests we consider the deconstruction of highly evolved tradition with his proposed framework for traversing it. Quote, I argue that we should think of highly evolved tradition, what Gadamer calls hermeneutical truths, in the same way. End quote. Szabo gives us three ideas for deconstructing highly evolved tradition. Quote, due to both the truth-value intertwining and evolutionary contingency, traditional forms cannot usually be easily reverse-engineered. However, due to the depth of multi-generational traditions, we may expect reverse engineering to be somewhat easier than invention or replacement from scratch. If we can come up with the proper methodologies for deconstructing tradition, to tease out truth from value, to determine cultural niches in which traditions flourish and fade, are more valuable or less, are more true or less, three different but related measures, and so on. End quote. And suggests we observe the interplay between the evolution of a culture and its religion. Quote, a good rule of thumb for rational interpretation of theological justification, map the objective fact of cultural evolution to the intersubjective truth of God. End quote. The following is a slightly awkward suggestion. It means, perhaps, in order to reduce the complexity distance and enter into the perspective of individuals of a culture, we should treat culturally held truths and religions as artifacts of stored complexity. Quote, In other words, treat God or the gods as a metaphor for our modern insights into cultural evolution." End quote. In physics, there can be repeatable and possible experiments or those of parsimony for determining truth. Quote, "In the physical sciences, experiments are usually possible and repeatable, or there are other objective means, such as parsimony, for determining the truth of a statement." End quote. Szabo notes the problem of subjectively observed objective information and the problem of authority and theorists. Quote, "Even when communicating purely objective information, subjective interpretation, selection, etc. quickly creep in, and those not directly observing the experiment must rely in large degree on the authority of the experimenters or the theorists." Coda, ad hominem, and argument from authority. Here he makes an interesting stop. Of ad hominem and argument from authority, he notes their usefulness in traversing complexity distance. Quote, "From an immediately rational point of view, these are always invalid methods of debate. However, we are computationally limited creatures, often not capable of anything even approaching full rationality, and so these thinking processes in practice have their place." End quote. We want to think about how the decision makers' lack of scientific understanding may be remediable by improving understanding of scientific methods themselves, rather than improving understanding of the results of particular sciences. Quote, "Much scientific misinterpretation and much of decision makers' lack of scientific understanding may be remediable by improving understanding of scientific methods themselves rather than improving understanding of the results of particular sciences."